Hi, I'm Ron Jackson for Acoustic Guitar Magazine. Today, we're going to begin your foray into jazz guitar by learning 3 basic scales. Have you ever wondered what scales guitarist Al Di Meola, John McLaughlin, and Paco de Lucia used when they were playing their cool jazzy improvisations on their acoustic guitars? Well, when I was in high school, I saw them play this song called Mediterranean Sundance. It was Di Meola on a steel string ovation, McLaughlin using a pick on a custom nylon string guitar, which was unheard of, and Paco de Lucia playing a real flamenco guitar with his nails. Man, I was really blown away by their scales, lines, and technique. I realized then that I could play jazz on any acoustic guitar. I had a cheap Fender steel string acoustic at that time and a nylon string similar to a Cordoba Protege C1 that you can pick up these days for about $200. Any beginning guitarist can play jazz on a budget acoustic, actually. You can practice scales on them using a pick or with your fingers. This is what jazz is all about: freedom and independence. So, did you know the scales jazz guitarists use are very common? Like most people who think jazz is a foreign language, I had no clue when I was in high school what these cats were playing, actually. It wasn't until I went to college at Berklee College of Music that I figured out what scales they were playing, also known as modes. And these scales were actually coming from the major scale, or the modes from the major scale. Now, everybody knows what do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do is, right? That's the major scale. Once you know those modes, you can create some cool riffs. Now, here's the major scale just so you can get a hang of what it sounds like on the guitar. It's do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do. I'm not the best singer in the world, but you get the idea. You heard this all the time in school. So let's get started here with our lesson about these 3 basic scales. Now, there are actually 7 different modes or scales that come from the major scale. Jazz musicians most often play the scale that goes with each chord of the progression they are playing. So this is known in jazz talk as playing the changes. In music theory, we call it chord-scale relationships. Basically, it just means you play the correct scale that goes with the chord you are on at that given moment, okay? So, there are 3 common scales that we're going to talk about today that are used in jazz. First is that major scale, which is actually called the Ionian mode also. So that has 2 names, okay? Now, you can play that on the C chord, the C major 6 chord, and the C major 7 chord, if you're playing a C major scale, okay? Or C Ionian mode, we call it. Now, the second most important scale is called the Dorian mode. And if you're playing D Dorian over a D chord, it would be a D minor scale chord, okay? Dorian is actually a minor scale chord because it has a lower third, which makes it sound sad. One of the chords you can play it on is the D minor, the D minor 6, and the D minor 7. Now, the third most important scale or chord scale is the Mixolydian mode, also known as the dominant scale. So that has 2 names too. Now, the dominant scale is usually played over a chord like a G7, a G9, dominant 9 we call it, and a G13 or dominant 13 we call it. Okay? So now, let's get to the exercises. Let your fingers do the walking. The easiest way to remember these scales is to memorize a fingering that you can move up and down the guitar neck like a movable bar chord, okay? Like a movable bar chord. So, For example, if I'm playing a C bar chord, major bar chord, that's on the 5th string root and looks like this. You might be familiar with this or not, but looks like this. This is actually what we call a movable bar chord. I can move it up 1 fret at a time, and if I know what the root is, I know what the name of the chord is. So this is the C root chord. If I move up 1 fret, we call it C sharp or D flat. If I keep moving up, it's D, etc., etc. Okay? You're going to learn your scales this way actually too. So, you have to memorize these fingerings I'm going to show you in the next examples. Now, example number 1 is the Ionian mode, or the major scale, okay, like we talked about before. The one you know as Do, Re, Mi, Fa, Sol, La, Ti, Do. It's the main scale used in Western music. It comes from Europe, actually. And the steps are known as, so that means if I start on the first note, it's known as 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 in theoretical terms. Back to 8, which is the octave, or the same note from the root all the way up to the end of the scale, okay? The notes are actually, on a C major scale, are C, D, E, F, G, A, B, back to C. Remember before, you could use that over a C chord, a C6 chord, or a C major 7th chord. You would play the C major scale over all those chords like that, okay? So, now I'm going to play example number 1. You have to memorize the fingering, okay? We're going to play it up and down, and then we're going to play it up 1 fret at a time up to D, actually. Here it goes, okay? Watch this. Now, move up the same fingering, 1 fret higher, and makes it a D flat major scale. And 1 fret higher makes it a D major scale. So if you memorize that fingering, you could play it up the neck 1 fret at a time, or any interval that you actually want, or fret spacing we call it. So the first major scale was a C major. You could play it over C major 7, then up to a D flat major 7, then up to a D major 7, like that. So memorize that fingering and play it up and down the neck.